Okay, guys, sorry. So, women started kind of leaving the house a little bit more. They started joining or forming and joining religious and charitable organizations, as well as literary societies and art clubs. In these groups, women did more than share their interests and experiences. By planning and carrying out projects, electing their own officers, writing reports, and speaking in public, they gained valuable experience outside the home. That experience would soon be put to use in the struggle for women's rights. From the beginning, women's rights activists in the United States disagreed among themselves on strategy and tactics. What was the best way for women to win the right to vote? Who should be allowed to take part in the movement, men and women? Should women devote themselves exclusively to gaining the right to vote or also pursue other reforms? Which means, should they focus on one issue at a time or basically go for the gold and go for all or nothing? By 1869, disagreements over these issues led women's rights advocates to split into two separate groups. So now we have the National Women's Suffrage Association, led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Susan B. Anthony, who you'll remember sewed the first American flag for our country. And this was the more radical of the two. The National Women's Suffrage Association barred men from membership and called its newspaper the Revolution. They demanded the immediate passage of a federal law granting women full voting rights. Their rival organization, the American Women's Suffrage Association, took a more moderate approach. Led by Lucy Stone and Julia Ward Howe, the AWSA welcomed men as members and sought to gain women's suffrage at the state and local rather than the national level. So, the National Women's Rights, or the National Women's Suffrage Association, they were more outspoken. They were ready for a little bit more of a fight, and they were going for the gold. They were trying to get the president, the actual national government, to give women the right to vote all over the country. The American Women's Suffrage Association, on the other hand, they were taking it a little bit slower. They invited men to join their group. They encouraged their help, and they started small with the local governments and the state government. So maybe they were trying to first get their city to allow them to vote, and then they would try to get the state to allow them to vote instead of going big or going home. At first, neither the NWSA nor the AWSA was able to make much headway. Hoping to revive their flagging campaign for women's suffrage, the two groups joined together in 1890 and formed the National American Woman Suffrage Association, NAWSA. The NAWSA benefited not only from changing times, but also from a new generation of leaders. For example, Carrie Chapman Catt led a successful suffrage campaign in Colorado. Catt served as president of the NAWSA from 1900 to 1904 and from 1915 to 1920. Recognizing that each part of the country had its own unique political circumstances, Catt developed a flexible state-by-state strategy. In some states, she instructed activists to limit their efforts, passing laws that would allow women to vote only in the U.S. presidential elections. In other states, she told staff members and volunteers to campaign for full voting rights in all elections. To conserve resources, Catt ended efforts in those states where chances of success seemed remote. The reorganization energized the campaign for women's suffrage by 1917. The NAWSA had enrolled more than 2 million members. And speaking of our dear Susan B. Anthony, the last thing we're going to talk about in our group time today is Susan B. Anthony. She was quite the lady. So this is 1872. and they had a presidential election that was coming up, and Susan B. Anthony was determined to cast her vote. So remember, it was not legal for women to vote. And Susan B. Anthony, who was one of our founding leaders of the National Women's Suffrage Association, says, no, I'm doing it. I'm going to vote. What are they going to do about it? With her sisters, she entered a voter registration center in Rochester, New York. She demanded to be registered as a voter. When the officials refused, she threatened to sue them or to take them to court. She argued that the 14th Amendment, which forbids states from making any law to abridge the privileges of citizens, would be upheld in court as proof of her right to vote. The officials, more intimidated than persuaded, registered her as a voter. On Election Day, Susan B. Anthony and a few other women cast their votes for president. 2 weeks later, they were arrested for casting illegal ballots. At her trial, the judge found Susan B. Anthony guilty. Before pronouncing his sentence, the judge asked Anthony if she had anything to say. Anthony responded with a stirring speech. There are varying accounts of her response. The following excerpts are from a document that Anthony prepared and distributed in 1874, an account of the proceedings on the trial of Susan B. Anthony in the charge of illegal voting. Judge Hunt, ordering the defendant to stand up. Has the prisoner anything to say why sentence shall not be pronounced? Miss Anthony. Yes, Your Honor, I have many things to say, for in your ordered verdict of guilty, you have trampled underfoot every vital principle of our government. My natural rights, my civil rights, my political rights, my judicial rights are all alike ignored. Robbed of the fundamental privilege of citizenship, I am degraded from the status of a citizen to that of a subject. And not only myself individually, but all of my sex are, by your Honor's verdict, doomed to political subjection under this so-called form of government. Your denial of my citizens' right to vote is the denial of my right of consent as one of the governed, the denial of my right of representation as one of the taxed, the denial of my sacred rights to life, liberty, property, and, Judge Hunt, the court cannot allow the prisoner to go on. The court must insist the prisoner has been tried according to the established forms of law. Miss Anthony. Yes, Your Honor, but by forms of laws all made by men, interpreted by men, administered by men, in favor of men and against women, and hence Your Honor's ordered verdict of guilty against a United States citizen for the exercise of that citizen's right to vote, simply because that citizen was a woman and not a man. Judge Hunt. The sentence of the court is that you pay a fine of $100 and the costs of the prosecution. Miss Anthony. May it please Your Honor, I shall never pay $1 of your unjust penalty. All the stock in trade I possess is a $10,000 debt incurred by publishing my paper, The Revolution, 4 years ago, the sole object of which was to educate all women to do precisely as I have done, rebel against your man-made, unjust, unconstitutional forms of law that tax, fine, imprison, and hang women while they deny them the right of representation in the government. And I shall work on with might and main to pay every dollar of that honest debt, but not a penny shall go to this unjust claim. And I shall earnestly and persistently continue to urge all women into the practical recognition of the old revolutionary maxim that resistance to tyranny is obedience to God. She was a strong lady. I would have liked to hang out with Susan B. Anthony, I think. Okay, so now we started with two groups of women who had slightly different ideals on how to go about this, and now they've joined together. We have got one of the most famous women in American history on trial for casting an illegal ballot and talking back to the judge, refusing to pay this unjust fine. And she says she owes $10,000 because of the revolution, and she plans to repay every penny of that. But she will not ever pay a single cent for this unjust claim. All right, tomorrow we are going to talk about what happens next. I'm also going to do a read aloud that I'll post for you to watch if you'd like to. Bye, guys.